we're about to get started with John Lindley really quickly in just about a minute. I just want to give a quick introduction. I'm actually from Chicago and grew up here and started in the industry here, so it's so nice to see a lot of old friends here doing their thing and a lot of new friends that we're making while we're here. It's a burgeoning filmmaking community, as we can see. We have stages and a studio and like 10 shows going at once. It's crazy. Who would have thought? I was here back in the days of Road to Perdition and Ali and Barbershop and shows like that. So it's been a while. It's been a minute. But it's really nice to see Chicago coming up like this. My name is Snehal Patel, and I'm the head of cinema sales for Zeiss. And we're going to be doing a conversation today with John Lindley. How are you, John? Let's turn your mic up. Yeah, there you go.
You hear me? Yeah, there we go. Hi. Yeah, I'm doing well, and thanks for having me, and I congratulate the people who put this event on. This is a great space, and I've seen some great stuff, so thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Can we get John's mic a little bit hotter? Yeah? All right, cool. So she'll be working on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically have a conversation with John. John's an ASC member who recently got a Lifetime Achievement Award.
The President's Award.
Oh, the President's Award.
Ellen Kuras got if I live long enough, I'll get a Lifetime.
Ellen Kuras, you're right. A President's Award, which is very prestigious. He's been nominated for his work before by the ASC. Was the International Cinematography Guild ICG president. I think you're stepping down this year. Is that correct?
Last week.
Last week.
I'm now the former president, yeah.
He's now the former president. I think it's cool to be former president. You still get all the perks of president, but none of the work.
It's the title you dream of, believe me.
Yeah, you're like, I did it. It's done. Bucket list completed. But I think you were ICG president since 2018, I want to say. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I was a vice president before that. I've been on the board for 12 years before that. So yeah. I've been doing it for a while. It's a great organization.
And I think part of when we were talking about the President's Award during the award ceremony, part of the thing that I think that was discussed was honoring the fact that you serve the community. It's not just that you work, you're successful as a cinematographer, but you share a lot, you help a lot of people out, and you take leadership positions. So that's wonderful. Yeah,
no, I was really flattered to get that award. I begged them not to give it to me, but they insisted, so I took it because I didn't know what else to do. But something happened to me on a set a little over 20 years ago that made me focus on safety on sets, and that's what drove me to participate in my local, and I still do for that reason.
Do you mind sharing that experience? It was an accident, right, that happened?
Yeah, so I was shooting a movie called Pleasantville, and at the end of our first week, we worked a 19-hour day, and my second assistant, Brent Hirschman, got killed driving home at the end of that day. And that started me working on something that I've been working on forever. And in the last round of bargaining for the basic agreement, we finally got a weekend turnaround after over 20 years of trying, and we have a 10-hour rest period in between work days, and again, another 20 years of trying. So, progress is slow. We all learned yesterday, I think, that it can also be reversed, but it takes a lot of work. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a fight I chose. It was a fight that chose me, and I never gave up on it.
Yeah, good for you, John. You started your career. Well, let's go back. I mean, you're from New York, right? You started
isn't everybody?
I think everyone is from New York. We're all from New York, right? Yeah. Okay. I think originally all of humanity came from New York. So when you started off your career, you started off in New York on the East Coast, correct?
I did. My mother I was raised by a single mom, and she was a literary agent, and she had sold movie rights to a director and producer couple. And they asked me to work on one of their movies my last year in high school, and I was bitten by the film bug. Unfortunately, the Vietnam War was going on, and if I didn't go to college, I would have been drafted. So I had been accepted to NYU Film School, and I said to the film school, look, if you give me a student deferment, I'll pay you the tuition, but I won't actually show up, and you'll have more space for the other students, and I will get the deferment and not have to go to Vietnam. And I thought this was like a win-win, and they didn't see it that way.
What a nice scheme.
They said, "Are you out of your mind?" Like, you're not doing that. So I ended up going to film school, and after that, I got into cinematography.
Okay, wonderful. And then when you first started out, you were working on other people's shows, right? So you started out, were you in the camera department and AC?
Yeah, so the first show I worked on, I was a production assistant. And the first assistant on that show was the product of a very progressive education. He could barely spell, but he had just lost his wallet the first day we were shooting, and he said, "Hey, John, can you help me write a letter?" In those days, you would write a letter to the credit card companies. "Can you help me write a letter?" And he said, "I drafted something, but just take a look." And I looked at something that sort of read like a ransom note, right? And I said, let me take a shot at this. So, Dear American Express, I lost my wallet, I need a new card. And he looked at it and he said, "This is fantastic, this is so great. I want you to work in our department." So then I ended up staying in the camera department.
Sometimes it's the letter writing abilities that get you into the camera department. We learn something
Yeah,
new
anybody
every
loses
day.
their wallet, let me know, I can help you out.
And then you were a camera operator as well on some features, correct?
I only operated for myself.
For
I
yourself,
wasn't good
okay.
enough to operate for other people. It was, I was really fortunate. I went from working as an electrician and working as a camera assistant to shooting in New York. And I was working on this terrible junk. I was working on a half-hour show for Liberty Mutual about trout fishing with a famous golf pro who was a has-been golf pro. But the producer of that show would give me 3 16-millimeter rolls, 33 minutes of film, to shoot a 27-minute show. And I would go out with the sound man and we'd shoot this show. But that producer got an opportunity to produce a television series in New York. And because I was the only DP he knew, he said, "Why don't you do it?" And I actually declined. I said, "I don't really want to do television." But I had this conversation by an elevator bank in a hotel, and the costume designer overheard it. And he said, "John, I don't want to tell you what to do, but this is probably an opportunity for you." So I went back to my room, I called the producer, and I said, "I'd like to do it after all." And it turned out to be the only TV show being made in New York that year.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and I was like, nobody had ever heard of me. I hadn't heard of myself. And the producer said to me one day, he said, "Look, the network suits are coming down to the set. When they come, I'll send somebody ahead of time. I don't want you to stand near the camera because I don't want them to know that you're the DP. You go stand somewhere else and they'll be there for 5 minutes and then they'll go away." But I was only like 28 years old, and that was unusual in New York at that time. At that time, New York was a real hierarchy. You could work for 15 years as an operator before you got a break as a DP. So I was just really fortunate.
Yeah, you got a nice big break. Now,
Yeah.
looking at your career, you did quite a bit of television. I mean, right now you're in town for Justified, is that correct?
Yeah.
Shooting here in Chicago.
Yeah, so I mean, as everybody knows who watches anything, there are now gigantic movies and there are little tiny indie movies and very little in between, which was where I lived often. And there's a lot of really great television, so I try to work on that when I can.
And so for Justified, if you look at the way that you film now, which is a digital show, multi-cameras, big sets, versus how you started out in New York on this first ever television show, that was filming at that time, what has changed in the industry since then?
The only changes are superficial. I mean, they're huge, but you're still trying to tell a story with images, right? And you're trying to figure out how to convey emotion with images, and that hasn't changed, and I don't think it ever will. What changes is we have LEDs instead of tungsten lights, we have digital cameras instead of film cameras, but in the end, if you can make an image that's a compelling image that gets people's attention, and you can work collaboratively with a director who's trying to tell a story with you, then nothing has changed. I mean, it's cave painting with motions.
And so do you like being near the camera, or do you like being near the monitors nowadays?
So I have a very mobile monitor set because I grew up without monitors at all. And I like being as close as I can to the cameras and to the actors and to the director. So I move my little mobile setup as close as I can to the set, and I'm right on the set all the time.
Okay. So yeah, you'd rather be right there where the action is.
Yeah,
and
I don't
for
like
the
working with
communication.
headsets. I worked with headsets during the height of the pandemic when I had to, and as soon as I could abandon them, I did. I don't find that a great way to work for me anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's review a few of your really popular feature films and shows, if you don't mind. First of all is one of my favorites, Field of Dreams. So let's talk about this. Yeah, you can turn around so we can see a little bit better and give some room to everybody so we can take a look. I'll also play a trailer in the background as we're talking about these films. But tell us how you got involved in this project. Like, how did it come to you? Did you have an agent? Did you read a script? This was a big opportunity for you at the time.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's an instructive story for people who are trying to get going. I had shot a $3 million movie for a director, and it was a movie that nobody heard of, nobody ever saw, but it was a great experience. And I liked the director, and he liked me. And after that was over, about 6 months later, he said, "Hey, I'm going to make a movie out of a book called Shoeless Joe. Would you be interested?" And I had read the book, and I really loved it. And at that time, I had a theory that there should be a literary conservancy so that when you loved a book, you would buy the rights so nobody would ever make it into a movie. You could protect it for the rest of its life. And yet, I really liked this director, so I said, sure. And we went off to Iowa and made a film that was largely under the radar that has, stayed with the society and the culture for quite a while. It's not that when that movie was finished, it almost didn't get released. It was screened for the head of the studio, who at the end of the screening said, "Why did we make this movie?"
Oh, no.
And Spielberg was a friend of my director's, and he saw the movie, and he said to the studio head, he said, "If you don't want to distribute it, I will." And the studio head said, "Okay, we will." And it's now part of the lexicon.
Rest is history, yeah. It's a legacy.
Yeah.
A few things I noticed about this film, it really felt like a one-camera shoot, like you really had one camera. It felt like you were using a lot of the 70s lockdown style, lots of tripods, lock it in place, let the actors provide the movement, and then movement when necessary. So halfway through the film, when things actually start going and the field gets built, that's when you started using, I think, some camera movement. Is this how you planned it? Is that how it worked out for you?
Yeah, it was a single camera movie, and you're right, but this only story you're missing is there's a shot, I don't know if it was on there, Kevin's in the field and the camera comes swooping in behind him and he turns to the camera, and we had a crane, a crane arm, but he had his back to us. And once, with that particular crane arm, was a Titan crane, when you moved that arm, there was a lot of mass in motion, and you couldn't stop it very quickly. So you had somebody running out to stop it at the last second. And Kevin had his back to the camera, and then he's supposed to turn when the camera stops. So we started that move, and the guy who was supposed to grab the arm tripped.
Oh, no.
And now we're coming right for Kevin's head with his back to the camera. So, I yelled duck, and he ducked, but we would have easily taken his head off. So that slowed us down a little bit about camera movement for a little while.
I would hope so.
Yeah, I didn't want to be known as the person who
concerns.
decapitated Kevin Costner. I'd rather be known for shooting Field of Dreams.
The next film that we want to talk about is You Got Mail, which when I was watching it, I think a couple of years ago, I saw it one more time on an airplane or something. But I noticed it at that time too, and I noticed it watching the trailer. Shallow depth of field for a comedy and tight shots. Like very dramatic lighting and filming, very traditionally dramatic lighting and filming for what's obviously a comedy, and the actors are really leaning into it. I mean, there's no bones about it. It's definitely a funny movie, but was that a choice?
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when the conventional wisdom was that a comedy was brightly lit with wide-angle lenses, and the actors played the frame, and then really Woody Allen and Gordon Willis upended that theory, right? I mean, they made these brilliant comedies that were beautifully photographed and staged, right? So, and that movie was made in New York. Nora Ephron, was a friend of Gordon's and everything. So she was open to doing it differently, and to make Meg Ryan look her best, I thought Shallow Focus would be the best choice, and so that's what we did. And it's a funny movie because as outdated as that version of email is, it has an audience still with people who their entire lives have been surrounded by email and texting and all that stuff. But it's still, again, it's an example of a story trumping everything, right? The story overcomes whatever technical antiquation it has.
And the interesting thing is, like you said, it is timeless because when you watch it, it still feels quite modern. But I noticed also you use longer focal lengths of lenses, even in the two shots. So you really felt like there was a depth to everything. So what format did you film this on? And you said it was film, right?
Yeah, we shot
35.
film in its 1.85. We shot it flat. It wasn't anamorphic.
Yeah. And then cropped it for 1.85. Yeah.
So you shoot full frame because in those days, you had the studio insisted that you shoot the full frame because if they wanted to pan or scan something, they had more picture area that they could work with.
Cool. The next one is Reservation Road. It's been a while since I've seen this one, but I always thought that this was. It's just beautiful. I think a lot of it has to do with the movement. There's a lot of movement in this movie, be it from the actors or camera movement, but very pretty. You had a lot of time to do very scenic shots, stuff that was lit very, feels like it was lit naturally at night. Things like that. So, I know this was shot on film, so that must have been challenging to film at night.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, everything was shot on film that I did, and Terry George was the director. He had done a movie called Hotel Rwanda, and he's an Irish director, and he was used to working with very few resources, and he liked natural light. So, and as did I. So that's what we did, and that's a movie I'm proud of that didn't get a big audience, but it's about something, and I like it.
Yeah, and it's very pretty, and like you said, with a lot of natural light. Even the stuff that has windows, I noticed it's like bounces really more than lighting it with the light coming in, which makes it really soft. So it definitely has a different look to it for sure. And then the one that you got nominated for an award for, which was of course Pan Am. Now Pan Am is interesting because it's digital, right? But it looks like film. So did you learn your lessons on film and then transfer the concepts to digital? Like, how did you get here?
Yeah, so I mean, this was one of the first things I shot digitally, and I was amazed at the camera I was using. I would look by eye, and a scene would look dark, and I'd look at my monitor, and it had so much life, and it just worked out, And people were kind of shocked. It's hard to imagine now, but the network executives they hadn't seen digital stuff before, and they'd never shot a digital pilot, and they were surprised. They were used to digital photography looking like sports or the news or something like that. And when they saw that it could be something different, which we all take for granted now, they were taken aback.
And this is a Sony camera technology, 2/3 inch?
Now, that was an Alexa.
A what?
An Alexa.
Oh, Alexa. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So this was when Alexas had come out and
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that was, so, Harry had made a D35 that didn't succeed. It had a pretty slow sensor and but early on I bought one of the first Reds, and then and I had that for a while, and I had an Alexa for a while, and so it's sort of wander around through different technology. And at that time, it's hard to imagine, but there were people who would refuse to learn how to use those cameras.
Yes, I remember.
They were film cinematographers, and they constantly were comparing the quality of the film with the quality of digital capture devices. And my attitude was different. I always said, depending on what a musician does that you like, you don't really care about their brand of guitar, right? It's what you care about is the music they make. And I feel that way about a lot of equipment too, a lot of cameras. It's like you can make something that looks great with any camera, and you can make something that looks horrible with the best camera ever made. It's a choice. Mm-hmm.
All right, and then turning, of course, to Pleasantville, which is acquired in black and white. And then this went through a DI process. So this is what Gary Adcock was telling me, that this was scanned and edited and finished in digital and then printed back to film. Is that right?
Yeah, it took a year. We actually shot color film. I shot tests in black and white and in color. And the black and white was a bolder grain and only had 3 layers. And the color film had 15 layers of T grain. So you couldn't make comps without the film looking very soft. So originally the idea was that we were going to shoot black and white, and artists would add color where it was required.
Right.
And then in the end, what we did was we used color and we stripped out the color, except when we left it in.
Except when you needed
but
it, yeah.
it took over a year to make that, and now you could do it in a week at the outside. But
Sure.
you know, we had what was called the Roto Army. You know, there was
Because it was
footage-
rotoscoped, yeah.
footage was
Every
being
frame.
sent to India so people
Yeah.
on SGI stations could work on it 24/7, and then it was brought back chemically because it was distributed on film.
Yes.
So to make a print that actually had the integrity of the black and white was very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, because the densities just weren't right. So yeah.
Yeah, and the lab's tolerances were plus or minus a point in every color.
Wow.
So you could end up 6 points off in all the colors combined, and then switch reels to something that was 6 points in the other direction. You'd fall out of your chair when you were in the audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why some of this was really revolutionary at the time, these kinds of processes, because you're right, today it seems so much easier. You can do it. You can actually get a black and white digital camera, too, and make it look like anything you want, too, so
Right.
you have a lot more choices.
Right.
More recently, you're doing television and a lot of commercials as well. What do you like about doing commercials? Like, I know you work with some great actors and awesome brands, so you must get some leeway when you're filming, but commercials is still a very much like recreating storyboards. How is that different from television or feature films?
You know, it's not true of all commercials, but many commercials are, the entire story is told with images.
Yeah.
So that's appealing. You know, no matter what movie you work on, sooner or later an actor's going to talk. You know, so, you know, you gotta deal with that. But on a commercial, you know, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them are image-driven, and that's fun to work on. You know.
And so that's your draw for it, is that,
Yeah.
you get to create that imagery.
Yeah, and often those commercial directors are people with a heightened visual sense. It's not always true for film and television directors. A lot of them are, you know, story-driven and script-driven, you know.
Whereas a commercial director is really looking at, like, what's it going to look like? What's the output going to be? How does someone look at the end of the day? How does the product look? So definitely paying a lot of attention to detail.
Yeah, I mean, just for a commercial director to get a project, they have to supply lots of visual references.
Right.
So they've already given a lot of thought to what the thing looks like. And when you think about some of the great visual storytellers in movies, people like Tony Scott or Ridley Scott, you know, these
Yeah.
are people that came from commercials. And then they started doing longer form, but the image means everything to some people. Mhm.
So what's your favorite kind of job? I mean, nowadays you've done the gamut, so.
Yeah, I mean, I hope no producer is listening. I would do this for nothing. It's like, it's all I ever wanted to do. It's all I know how to do. And it's the only thing I'll do for the rest of my career, however long that turns out
Oh, wow.
to be.
That's a nice feeling, and
Yeah.
really great that you're in that position to say that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm so fortunate. You know, anybody who does the work I do should just be grateful. You know, I mean, I have a friend who owns a little gas station in a little town in Long Island.
Yeah.
And he'll say to me, "Yeah, what do you do when you go on the road? Doesn't that food cost you a lot of money?" I go, "Yeah, they give me food." He goes, "What?" I said, "What about the hotel? Doesn't that cost you a lot of money?" I go, "No, they give me a place to stay." He goes, "What?"
Yeah.
You know, most people in this country can't imagine working the way we get to work on a film set. It's an
Yeah.
extraordinary privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you know, what do you feel about with the, you know, coronavirus and the lockdowns and the restart and stuff like that? Sometimes the hours got longer. It got a little bit more grueling on set with the masks and the shields. But you still worked at that time period, 2020, 2021. What did you feel like the changes in the industry trying to protect everybody?
No, you know, the then president of the DGA is a friend of mine, and as soon as he got a project, we did a little HBO thing with the West Wing cast about getting out the vote. It was
Yeah.
one of the first things that was shot after the shutdown. And I said to him, if the president of the DGA and the president of ICG 600 work on something and nobody gets sick, that's sending a message to the industry. So we did, and nobody got sick. And Marty Sheen was on that show. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a very vulnerable guy in that population. And nobody got sick. So I've worked nonstop since then, and I'm a member of a community that is so adaptable technologically and in every other way. And I've said it from the beginning that the people I work with, they go to work on Monday at 5 in the morning and they go to work on Friday at 5 at night, and they don't know next week what their schedule is. Cameras come along and change by the hour. Lenses are changing constantly. Everything is changing, and yet the community that we're all in is highly adaptable. And that's an incredible strength, and that was the strength that got us through the pandemic.
No, absolutely. That's a good one. Coming back to your career, you've had, of course, your ups and downs where, there's projects you did that didn't turn out well, and there's horror stories, I'm sure. So what is something that you can maybe share with, a younger generation of a lesson that you learned from maybe not a great experience or a bad experience that you had that taught you later on to help solve a problem or catapulted you to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about tenacity and stamina, obviously. People used to ask me, well, how do you become a DP? And I'd say, well, the first thing you have to do is convince yourself. Until you say, okay, I'm a DP, nobody else is going to say it for you. And even after you say it, it might take a while to get people to say it with you. But that's what it takes, and it's you put up Field of Dreams, people applaud. The biggest mistake I ever made in my career, the biggest lighting mistake, was on that movie. and yet, the movie survived, I survived, and I once I did 4 movies with Nora Ephron, and I made a terrible lighting mistake in a scene with one of her movies too, and I was so sorry. And I went up to her after dailies and I said, look, I'm really sorry. And she put her hand on my shoulder and said, nothing but fuck ups. And she laughed. And that's, if you get around people like that, where you're able to make mistakes and they'll recover from them with you, then you just got to keep shooting. I remember a pitcher being interviewed. I saw once on TV a guy gave up a winning home run, and somebody goes running up to him from the press and says, "Hey, how do you feel giving up a winning home run?" And he turned to the guy and he said, "It's a good thing I pitch every few days." And that's the way I feel about cinematography. It's like I make mistakes frequently. It's a good thing I keep shooting.
Yeah, that's good advice, absolutely. And the tenacity part, you got to push through it. I think the longer you last in the industry, the further your career grows. So sometimes you got to take the hits and just keep going.
Everyone will make mistakes.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Absolutely.
In every category, the actors, the directors, the cinematographers, everyone will make a mistake. The only question is how you respond to failure. It's easy to respond to success. That's not that hard.
Right.
Responding to failure takes a little character.
Yeah. Absolutely. In your position as cinematographer, you're in charge of 2, if not 3, groups of people on set. You're in charge of lighting and the lighting team. You're in charge of camera, sometimes a grip as well, right, in conjunction with the gaffer. So what advice do you have about managing people like that? Because you must pick and choose, very carefully who's on your team and who's working with you, I'm sure. But, there's got to be ways to deal with issues or problems or getting through the day that, you can share with us.
Well, I consider myself fortunate because I'm not a genius. I can't do it alone. So I rely on collaborating with the electricians, the gaffer, my camera operators, the key grip, all the grips. I have to collaborate with the ADs, most importantly, the director and the actors. So for me, going into it with an open mind and working with all those people and everybody saying, here's the goal. Let's do the best possible work we can. Let's show each other what our best work is. That's my only advice. Don't just collaborate. And if you have somebody who's not as strong as you wish they were, make them stronger. It's easy to make people fail. It's easy to make people look bad and feel bad. But it doesn't help you in the end. Maya Angelou has one of my favorite quotes of all time. She said, "No one will remember what you said, and no one will remember what you did, but everyone will remember how you made them feel." And that is a great quote, because that's true on a film set too.
No, absolutely. Very good advice. As a manager, of course, you're managing teams. You're also split between two personalities as a cinematographer, part artist and part nerd, right? Because you really have to know a lot about the equipment and cameras, lenses, lights, and stuff like that. How do you balance the two? Like, I know when you came in here today, you're like, oh, I want to go check out some stuff, some new things. So how do you balance that with artistry?
I think everybody finds their own level of interest in the technology, whatever that technology is, and I fall somewhere in the middle, I think. So I surround myself with people who know more about it than me. And that way, if I have a problem or if I have a need that I can't figure out how to solve myself or to provide myself, then I turn to the people who know more about it than me. I'm pretty autocratic about the creative part of it, but the technological part, I surround myself with better people.
Let the experts tell you what the chinguses and the buttons do.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff changes so fast. It's just the technology. It's not just the change; it's the pace of change.
Yes.
And we all think sometimes, wow, look where we are. Here's where we are. We're just another stepping stone. There's who knows where we're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've seen the sea change from film to digital, where you said that you started shooting all your stuff solely on film, changed over to digital. Digital technology has changed quite a bit. So what do you think is exciting for the next level? Like, what are you looking forward to?
For me, one of the most exciting things is these very sensitive sensors, because I spend more time unlighting than I do lighting. I go to a location, I just turn off a lot of lights, and then the chip is so sensitive that sometimes you get little edges of lights or reflections or colorful reflections that you would never have time to put in yourself. But these cameras see them and capture them, and I love that about them. But I did have, Bryan Cranston said to me last year, but we're doing a day scene in a courtroom, and he said, John, I can't see the other actor. And I said, all right, I'll give you a little light on that guy. But if you want to work at these incredibly low levels, it can kind of throw the cast a little bit, because it changes the mood of the set.
Yeah.
If all you're looking at is a monitor, you see that it looks like a day scene. But if you're on the set, you go like, wow, it's dark in here, And so, that's another balancing act with the cast,
Yeah. To see, of course. I mean, you want to give them enough for them to work off of too. So, that's really,
but as little as possible. I want to take care of my own needs first.
Yeah, of course. What does the having a little light as possible give you? Does it give you more control over the sources and the direction of the light?
Yeah, I mean, it means sets that aren't as hot, and makeup that's not running, and prosthetic devices, appliances that aren't falling off actors, and it's just more fun for me to do. When I first started shooting, I shot ASA 25 film. We'd shoot in a kitchen in a house, and I'd have a 5K lamp 4 feet from somebody's head. I mean, that was horrible. This is a lot more fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of hair burning when you have that kind of
Michael
setup.
Jackson,
Jeez.
right? That happened to Michael Jackson with Bob Richardson. His hair started smoking.
Smoking? Oh, man. Oh, yeah, that would not be pleasant whatsoever.
No.
Nowadays you have these LED lights, which are cool to the touch, which, give you a good punch, and
an incredible range of color, right?
Yeah.
I have a board operator standing next to me on the set all the time with an iPad, and she and I can play right up until the last second with colors.
Like DJing the colors, right?
Yeah, and she is. DJing is a good analogy because her fingers fly across that thing,
Pretty cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the floor for Q&A, and we have a microphone here. Let me just make sure it's working. Hello, is this one working? Yes, it is. So we have a microphone here. So who has a... Oh, Colette, thank you for helping out. Who's got a question? And keep the questions relevant and short, please. Thank you.
All right. Well, is it on? Gotcha.
Yes.
Well, hi, I was on City Primeval. I don't know if you remember me, the bartender. But I have a question. I work in storyboard and animation. So what can I do as a storyboard artist to be the most help to the DP as well as the director? Like, how could I use my skills to make the pre-production and the production go smoothly to what you need?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to give you two answers. One, I'm sure you know, is work as fast as you can. Because I go to these meetings with a director who says, yeah, I want to do this, this, and this. And they'll end up with 40 setups for a scene that's going to have 10. And then when they revisit it, so they don't want to spend a week waiting for that batch of boards. They want to see those quickly so that they can go through them and amend them, right? But the other thing is the best storyboard artists, my favorite storyboard artist that I've worked with, and Pleasantville's an example, was a guy who was a comic book artist. So his angles were always interesting. Even if we didn't do them, they always catalyzed some thinking on my part or the director's part. They were inspiring, you know. If on a good day I can draw a stick figure, you know, no one would make a movie out of my storyboards. But if there's any way that you can put something in your storyboards that inspire the cinematographer and the director visually, that for me that's a huge value.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice question. We don't hear from storyboard artists, so that's a good one. Who else has a question for John? There we go, up front. Thanks, Colette.
I was curious about your work on Your Honor, because I love Bryan Cranston. How was it going into a TV process? Did you do the whole season, or you went in and worked on an episode? And if it was just an episode, how do you factor into your work of stepping into somebody else's, you know, project where they've already got things set up?
No, it's a really good question. So originally I was hired to do there were 10 of them. Somebody else did the first 3. I was hired to do the next 3. The team that did the first 3, the director, DP, and the operator, worked. The German director, British DP, and a British operator, brilliant. These people work together all the time. They did All Quiet on the Western Front last year. When that comes out, it'll blow people away. So I came into it with the courtroom established, but all the other locations that I worked at, I could do myself. And even within the courtroom, which was a set, we had a huge amount of flexibility. So I was supposed to do 4, 5, and 6, and someone else was supposed to do 7, 8, 9. Cranston was going to direct 10, and he asked me to do that one with him. COVID shut the production down. The DP who was going to do 7, 8, 9 went off to do Jack Ryan. So I ended up doing 4 through 10, the last of which was Cranston's. I was told from the beginning, before I took the job, the showrunner said, "You're not obligated to duplicate the look in the first 3. We want you to do it because we think you'll bring something of your own." Now, it so happened I had deep admiration for the work they did on the first 3, so I did a lot of stuff in the courtroom that was at least a first cousin of what they had done. But all the rest of it, I just did what I wanted, and I didn't get fired, so it must have worked.
Nice. It's rare to get that kind of leeway, right? Where they say, hey, 3 episodes in, go ahead and do what you want.
Yeah, although it's happening more and more with alternating DPs.
Really?
You know, it depends. If you're on a procedural show, a hospital show, or a cop show, nobody wants you to do something new, right? It's like you go to a concert, nobody wants to hear the new music, they want to hear the hits, right? So it's a little bit like that. But in my experience, and maybe because I have a fair amount of attitude, I'm usually told like to do what I want, because I guess they figure I will anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, as an independent filmmaker, I was taught as a director with the University of Chicago group. They always taught us, learn to make the film without using sound. If you can convey that message with the emotion, then you've captured what you need to. If you were a new independent filmmaker, knowing what you know about digital cameras and things like that, what would you be particularly looking at that's not on the high end of the scale, but in terms of working with different cameras? What might you be interested in?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question. What I always say to people who are trying to move up or break in is, show me your still photography, because you don't need expensive equipment to take great still photographs. And there's plenty of examples of brilliant photography with iPhones, and everybody's got a phone with a camera. So a still image often can tell an incredibly emotional story. And I encourage people to take pictures and to show them to people that they hope will hire them someday. I think that's really meaningful, and it certainly is for me. When I hired the B camera operator on the show I'm on now, I said, "Can you show me some stills that you took?" And then there's a common language that you develop. That's a kind of currency, right? We're talking about images, people who make them, talking with one another about how to make them, and that to me has a real value. And as I said, it costs virtually nothing.
Yeah, I like that advice about using still photography because it's so accessible.
Yeah.
And you could really experiment all kinds of nowadays, like you said on the phone, you even had 3 cameras built in.
Right.
You could have a wide, medium, and telephoto shot. Yeah.
Right, and I remember a very famous Magnum photographer saying once that he was taking pictures and they were sort of okay, they weren't great. He was for Life magazine, which was a big pictorial, and his editor finally said, "I know what's wrong with your pictures." And the photographer said, "Okay, what?" And he said, "Get closer." And from then on, the guy started taking pictures near people, and it changed his relationship with the subject. And it's actually true on a film set too. Your Honor, I used a 32 millimeter lens for Brian's close-ups. The camera's this far from his face on a close-up. That changes a performance, right? That's different than being over there with a 100 millimeter lens and doing the same size frame. Now, Brian is fearless. He likes, he's comfortable with his looks. He's not trying to look younger or more handsome, whatever. And he's a fearless actor, so he was up for it. But, that's an example of if you take stills, you get to learn well, here's what it's like if I'm right near somebody, and what is that social contract like? Deanne Arbus is a famous still photographer, right? And she took a lot of photographs that are famous of people with special needs or people from sort of the Midway and places like that. And she was often criticized for taking advantage of those people. And I always thought, look at her pictures. She was 3 feet from these people. She wasn't stealing a shot from the bushes. She was a friend of mine who worked with her said she was an ambassador of empathy. People felt something from her when the camera was that close. And if we make the actors feel comfortable, then we can do anything with them.
Hi, John. Thanks for being here today, taking a Saturday out. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
So I have a commercial production company, and I'm not a cinematographer. So when I walk into a room with a cinematographer who's new, what do you recommend as the shorthand of what should that conversation be? What should people who are not cinematographers tell the cinematographer? What would that dialogue that you'd want to hear and you'd think would be most productive to get the best shots out?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the most productive thing for me is to see references from a production company or an agency. Usually the agency's got some that they've showed to the company that's bid the job, whatever. And if those don't exist, then I encourage the cinematographer to bring their own to a meeting and to a location, because ultimately it's true for everything we all do, not just our jobs, but what are our expectations in any relationship, and are they the same as the other person's, and how can we achieve them, right? That's true at home and at work and everywhere we are. So, if I work on an indie movie and somebody shows me a visual reference from a $200 million movie, that's a problem, and I call it out. I say, don't show me those, because we don't have those resources. So if your expectation is that I can provide that with the resources we have, then it's going to be a failure, and I don't want to be involved. So I would say, have the same expectations visually, and then people can have a dialogue about upping the game, or maybe we could move some money over here to get a piece of equipment we didn't plan on. But I think common goals, and the best way to achieve that is with visual references for cinematographers.
I have a question.
Yeah, hit me.
Differences between film and digital. You can think of this from the still world or also moving images of, as working with film tend to be a little more intentional because you're exposing that film and you don't have this unlimited amount of digital space. And so what I've seen and heard from people is, I'll go on a set now and they'll just say, oh, keep rolling, keep rolling, keep rolling. And it has some of that been lost of like refining and the shots and making sure that you're getting what you want and only what you want, because now you can just roll and roll and roll?
Yeah, I mean, what's been lost is being decisive and incisive, because when you rolled the camera and it cost a lot of money, you didn't do it until everybody knew what was going on, right? And now you can do it and sort of figure it out along the way. But, some other things have been lost. It used to be we all went to dailies and saw film dailies at night. And I would go to dailies on a movie with people who had won Academy Awards for costumes, production design, sound, whatever it was. I wanted those people to look at my work on the screen and be blown away. Now, digitally, we all watch dailies on our own, and we like it, we don't like it, whatever, but there's not much of a dialogue about it. So to me, that's one of the bigger losses. And then the other one is, when I first started shooting, and I shot film, no one knew what it was going to look like, maybe except me and the gaffer. And I remember working on a movie with a big-time Hollywood producer. And the first night shoot, he came up to me and he said, I don't know, John, that lighting looks awfully bright. And I said, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And the next night we went to dailies, and he saw the scene that we'd shot, and he said, oh, John, that looks awfully dark. And he never said another word to me the entire production about the lighting. Now, it's different with digital. I had a monitor on a set recently, and there was a light and a condor that I was going to take up in the air for a night shoot. And somebody from the agency said, God, that light looks awfully bright. Now, the condor had not even gone up in the air yet, but this person's looking at a monitor, right? So that's a loss for me. Being a magician has changed, and some of the respect for that craft has gone away with it.
Hi.
Good questions.
Hi.
Very nice.
I know this is kind of general, but like, what's your relationship with your gaffer?
With the gaffer? So, that's one of my most important relationships. That's a really good question. The gaffer I have on my show, I've worked with for, my current show, I've worked with for, 7 or 8 years. And I brought that person with me. Having a strong relationship with that person means I can work faster and I can work more to my goal, right? So he and I look at pictures before this show. We looked at reference pictures I had, and I said, here's how we're going to do this, and that's an essential relationship for me. And I've had the good fortune to work with some people for the first time and have that relationship very quickly. And I've had the other experience where I just never connect with the gaffer, and then it's not nearly as productive for me or rewarding. But it's a really good question. Are you a cinematographer? Yeah. What's your relationship with your gaffer?
Well, right now I'm kind of the gaffer myself. So just because I work with like a small crew, just like me, the director, and then usually an AC, and then our actors. But I have an upcoming short, so I was just wondering, because I want to seek out like a gaffer that I trust, and like hopefully our relationship will work. Yeah.
No, look, for me, the lighting is my favorite part of the job. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's true for you, I don't know. But if that's the case, that's the most important relationship on the crew. I can put the camera where I want, and I can tell if I have an operator who I don't think is very skilled, which almost never happens to me, but I can say, here's the frame I want right here, and I can keep an eye on that. But the gaffer, I have a much more amorphous language about my intention. So that, for me, that's a critical relationship.
Sorry, I lost my question, but no. It was, do you give the gaffer more creative freedom, or is it you're overseeing everything? You're yes, giving them permission most of the time?
It depends on the person I'm working with, but it's a good question. If I trust that person, I always have an idea for what I want a scene to look like. One of the things that happened to me, and you're leading me to something I should have mentioned earlier, but when I first started to shoot, I thought a lot about lighting the people in the scene. I thought, here goes Meg Ryan. I better have a light for her over here. And as I got more confident and more experienced, I started lighting spaces and let the actors work within them. So if somebody went into a dark place in the room, so be it, right? So what I talk about with the gaffer is the mood that I'm after in that particular set at that moment, you know, and that's critical.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good questions. We had one here in the front.
I have two questions. One is I'm directing my first feature next summer, is the intention. What advice do you have for preparing with the DP, like, yes, basically that, like how far in advance, what should we be doing to prepare, particularly for the first feature, because it's like you've never done it before. I've done web series, I've done short films, but a feature is different. And the second question, it's related, is that with all the previous projects, web series, short films, there's been so many people on the teams that have stayed, and we've cultivated like a progression of a relationship. For some reason, the DP, I am waiting to meet my DP soulmate that I can have a lifetime of filmmaking with. I want to know how to cultivate that relationship with, as a director, so that we can work together, you know, forever.
Yeah.
So those are my two questions: how to prepare and
no,
how.
those are both great questions. The first one I'll say, for me, there's no such thing as too much prep. I like to be a part of choosing the locations, especially if the project is small. I don't want to be put on a penthouse of a hotel and told that I have 6 hours to shoot when it's going to take me 3 hours to get the equipment up there. You know what I mean? So there are certain logistical things that I want to have an influence over, but also I want to know the designer as well as the director. So for me, I like a lot of prep, and during that prep, I like everybody to take pictures, even directors who are not photographers. I encourage them, because you're a director, you might see something, go, I love this, that I might not notice, but if you show me something, oh, I see, that's what she wants to build on. So lots of prep and take pictures and share them is my advice for that. And finding that DP is like saying, how do I fall in love a little bit? You know what I mean? I don't know, but you know when you do. You know what I mean? It's really I was really fortunate. I shot 4 movies for Nora. I shot 4 movies for the guy who did Field of Dreams. I shot 5 movies for the guy who did Money Train. When I found somebody who trusted me, who I trusted, we did a lot of work together. So you won't wonder. You know what I mean? But the hardest thing, I think, is to interview somebody. I'm a terrible interview. I like the first job I got shooting a TV movie in New York. I was one of 19 people they interviewed, and I was so naive that when the director said, "What do you think of the script?" I told him, and I didn't think it was very good. And the director hired me, and he said later, he said, "You know what?" He said, "You were the only person who told the truth. Everybody else came in with some bullshit about the camera being a window on the soul and all this stuff." But I just didn't know any better. I didn't know that you were supposed to express wild enthusiasm and get the job and then try to fix things later. But I guess my point is that honesty and directness, the directors I've had deep relationships with, they could say anything to me and I could say anything to them. And I mean anything. You know, we talked about very intimate experiences that might inform a scene or a script. Things that I'm sure they never said to anybody else, that I never said to anybody else. But we had a faith in one another that we were in a safe relationship where we could do that.
Can I send my script to you? It's got Nora Ephron vibes.
I would be flattered. Thank you. And you know what? She should be alive today.
What's that?
She should be alive today.
Do we have any other questions for John? I had a question for you, John.
Sure.
How do you pick camera lens combinations? Because nowadays you have a plethora of possibilities, and you've had quite a bit of experiences with a lot of technologies. So, you know, what are your go-to kind of steps on choosing?
Yeah, so I pick a camera that has at least 2500 EI because that's a world I like to live in when I'm lighting. And then the lenses, it just depends what I'm up to. This is a pretty young group, but there was a time when all anybody wanted to do was make sharper lenses. And then when digital photography came along, actors and actresses went, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want any part of this. And so then the next thing you know, we're taking these lenses that have been developed for decades and trying to make them fuzzy. So then it was like, okay, let's get vintage lenses. But then the ACs couldn't work with them. So let's rehouse the vintage lenses so that they work with Prestons and remote follow focus systems. So it really depends on the project is the answer. Is it a period piece? And sometimes I think a period piece should be the opposite of what people do. Soft and sepia. It didn't look like that at the time. It's like, when we see black and white footage, it wasn't black and white to the people in that shot, So, sometimes you can kind of go against the grain with the lenses and find something great, I think. But, and then everything old is new again, right? I remember when everything was backlit smoke and lasers. That went away. Now everything's backlit smoke and lasers again. It's like, okay.
Backlight's the best. Backlight's the best light. So.
Yeah. So, but lenses are a little bit like that too. There are a lot of fad is making it sound pejorative. I don't mean it that way, but there are a lot of times when people like a certain look and then they transition to another one. Deep focus, shallow focus, high contrast, low contrast, high saturation, low saturation. So all of those things are decisions that should be made with the director and the designer very early on.
Absolutely. And then, of course, choosing spherical, anamorphic, or any of the various formats, that also comes in conjunction with communicating with the director and the filmmaker.
Yeah, and people used to be terrified of shooting anamorphic because to get an anamorphic lens to work, basically you had to shoot at a 4, and if your EI was 500, you needed a lot of light. But if you're using 2500 or 5000 EI, you can get to a 4 no problem, right? So now that's why you see anamorphic commercials occasionally, and you see TV shows that are anamorphic. There are fewer lens choices, so you can't get as many. If you're shooting 3 or 4 units, it's harder to get that many lenses that are compatible. But if you're shooting a smaller scope, then you can shoot anamorphic, and it doesn't create some lighting budget that the producer goes crazy about.
Yeah, speaking of multicam, would you like to go back to single camera? And
I would.
Get rid of everyone else?
I would, but the way I use the second camera, again, I have a lot of attitude about this. I don't ever put 2 cameras next to each other. I don't do a wide shot and a tight shot at the same time. I have one camera to tell the story, and I take the B camera person and I say, find me something I wouldn't do otherwise. Find me something that's not just the dialogue, And it doesn't mean they always are able to do that, but when they find something, it's something unusual and surprising, and it elevates the whole look.
So not using them just for coverage, actually using them to tell another story point.
One of the best operators I ever worked with, this was a guy who Tony Scott hired before he hired the DP. That operator became my B camera operator. It's a shame that they call them A and B because it sounds like they're hierarchical. This guy is a brilliant photographer, and I always wanted him to be the B camera operator. He made every movie I worked on with him look better because of that.
Nice, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions, so 2 quick questions. All right, one right there. Yes, please.
Sorry if this may have been covered before, but do you operate yourself? And are there scenarios where you might choose to operate or choose to not be behind the camera?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. I do not. I started out doing that. Before I got into the IA, I was in a union called NABIT in New York, and I operated for myself. I was allowed to. And it was a hard transition for me to give that up. But once I did, I started working with people who really added something to the look of the movies I worked on. I was really fortunate. I've worked with some phenomenal operators, brilliant photographers. And on television, where you're trying to maintain a pace, just keeping up with the schedule is really helpful that way too. Again, it's a little bit like the gaffer question. If you have a great gaffer, you can spend more time with the operator. If the gaffer's not that strong, you got to leave the operator with the actors while you spend more time with the gaffer. So I work with an operator now, and that's the only way I work. Yeah.
Good question.
Hi, I'm Sada. Nice to meet you. A question I had is I was wondering what aspect of the craft you think that people that are starting out, or even people that have been in this industry for a while, tend to overlook, but that you think that personally you think is really important, and sometimes that gets overlooked in the process.
Aspects in terms of getting work, or in terms of developing a career, or
in terms of the creative process of it, or even the logistics of just the
Right.
process when you have
Is there a
film.
step that someone skips
yeah, I
creatively?
mean,
that they shouldn't?
look at movies and find the ones that you love the look of, and analyze them. Figure out what there is that you love about it, and then try to emulate that just as a practice. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that you have to create that look yourself, but if you learn how to analyze a look and you can recreate it, even with a still camera, then you have a kind of a historical knowledge that will inform your own creative foundation. So I think it's essential to look at great looking movies, and there's so many of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a good question.
Really wonderful questions. Thank you so much, audience. Why don't you give yourself a round of applause for being so amazing? Thank you for all of you in the back as well, listening in to John Lindsay, ASC, speaking about his experiences. Now, I've heard one thing is that you like to leave off by giving everyone homework to do. So do you have homework for our audience to go back with
Yeah,
today?
watch movies.
There you go.
Right,
Watch
yeah.
movies.
And I'll say, can I just shill for one thing? Tomorrow I'm here with another International Cinematography Guild member named Dave Comides. We're doing a safety panel. And as I mentioned early on, that's what got me into the leadership of my local. And I know how dangerous this work is, especially for people who are coming up. And if you are inclined, or if you have time, I hope you'll come to that safety panel. There's a lot that we can share with you about how to protect yourselves and one another. And on my own show a couple of weeks ago, I had a crew member who fell asleep driving home and crashed her car.
Oh boy.
It's everywhere around us. And as you know, I'm sure you heard about Helena Hutchins, who was killed by a gun. I still don't use the word accident for what happened to her. There's no way that could be described. That's just pure negligence, and I don't care who sues me for saying it, but that should never have happened. Sarah Jones killed on a train track. That should never have happened.
Yeah.
Brent Hirschman killed in his car. That should never have happened. It can happen to any of us. So I urge you to be careful. The ICG has our website has a safety page. We have a safety app that's really helpful, and we're coming out with a new one in about 3 weeks. So download that app. You don't have to be a member to use that app. It's really, really good. And if you have a chance, stop by tomorrow, and please be careful. No one should get hurt doing this work ever. Thank you.
John, what time is the talk tomorrow?
I don't know. I forgot.
We're standing by. Yes, Zoe. Hold on. We got to get you a mic.
I was just wondering, with the most recent negotiations, with all the studio platforms that are out there, and seeing how television kind of has become sort of like a factory, is there anything that has changed in the most recent round of, like, besides the turnaround time that we're talking about? In general, I just see a consolidation happening, but I'm just wondering, I'm seeing crew more exhausted than ever, and the balance of work-life is just non-existent for what's happening with all these. It's great in one way because the work is plenty, but it's also
tiring.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. The rest periods change, as I mentioned. Some of the step-back rates were eliminated. So there were a bunch of changes, but there's a commercial contract coming up in the next couple of months. That's a national contract. There's a pay TV agreement coming up. There's a low-budget contract coming up. All of that happens before December, and I guarantee you that the employers want to take back as much as they can from the basic agreement. So that all of those things will be a fight. The biggest threat that cuts across every department are unsafe hours, right? Because not all of us are going to work with guns. Not all of us are going to work with trains. Everybody on the crew is going to work too long and drive home. And that's the threat to really confront. So we need to keep working on that. But thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It's so nice to have you come out and listen in.